Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is For the Record program number 443, titled The Serpent's Diaries, Part 2, subtitled Neo-Nazis and 9/11. This program is being recorded on January 25th of the year 2004. Before we get into the substance of the broadcast, let me remind you, first of all, that sister station WFMU-FM in Jersey City, New Jersey, is archiving the For the Record programs on Real Audio. More recent programs are streaming at wfmu.org/Dave Emory, one word, DAVEEMORY. Older programs are available for download only on Real Audio at a longer URL linked to both the wfmu.org/Dave Emory website and to the For the Record section of the Real Audio-equipped Spitfire website as well. Within a week or so of the airing of this program, there will be a detailed, annotated, article-length description of For the Record program 443 in the For the Record section of the Spitfire website at www.spitfirelist.com. Spitfire List is one word, SPITFIRELIST.com. People have inquired about how to assist the work that I'm doing. At the beginning of each description of the For the Record programs, there is a notation on the web that you can click on in order to help support the work that I'm doing. Now, For the Record 443, again, is titled Serpent's Diaries, Part 2, subtitled Neo-Nazis and 9/11. The title is a contraction of two books published by National Vanguard Books, The Turner Diaries and Serpent's Walk, both of which I've used extensively in the past. The National Vanguard Books is the publishing arm of the National Alliance, arguably the most important domestic Nazi group. And what we're going to be looking at during the course of this broadcast is evidentiary tributaries running between the events in and around September 11th and the so-called neo-Nazi milieu, particularly the National Alliance. We're going to begin by taking a look at an article from Counterpunch magazine. The URL for this will be available on the description. Counterpunch is put out by Alexander Coburn. This article is titled Neo-Nazis and 9/11 by Jack McCarthy. It's dated October 29th of 2001. Skipping down in the article about Dr. William Pierce, the head of the National Alliance and the author of the Turner Diaries, we read, upon perusing Pierce's speeches from 1988 and 99, I discovered that Pierce, who heads the National Alliance, did indeed utter some most interesting pre-September 11th, if not prophetic remarks about Osama bin Laden and bioterrorism. The running theme in Pierce's commentaries is to paraphrase his hero Hitler, that Osama bin Laden's warning to America is, I am coming, and so is bioterrorism. In one chilling commentary, Pierce, after noting that bin Laden and the rest of the lost generation of angry Muslim youth had it with their parents' compromises and were hell-bent on revenge against infidel America, issued this stark, prophetic warning in a 1998 radio address titled, Stay Out of Tall Buildings. Quote, New Yorkers who work in tall office buildings anything close to the size of the World Trade Center might consider wearing hard hats, Pierce warned. And again, this was in 1998. Skipping down in this article, also recall that one of Pierce's followers, the notorious Nevada-based microbiologist Wayne Harris, that's actually Larry Wayne Harris, has been arrested twice over the last decade, once for possession of bubonic plague materials, and the other for possessing and allegedly planning to use anthrax. We've talked about Larry Harris and the anthrax scare in For the Record 89, and we discussed that in the context of the late Dr. Larry Ford, who worked variously for the South African Project Coast biological warfare program from the apartheid era, also the Central Intelligence Agency at the same time, and Larry Ford also had been working for what appears to have been an underground Bruderbond milieu, and had strong connections to the right-wing militia and Aryan Nations milieu. More about that later in the program. We discussed overlapping areas of operation between Pierce and Larry Wayne Harris in For the Record program number 419. Now, note again that in 1998, William Pierce, the head of the National Alliance, warned in a radio address titled "Stay Out of Tall Buildings," quote, "New Yorkers who work in tall office buildings anything close to the size of the World Trade Center might consider wearing hard hats." That is more than a little interesting, and what we're going to be doing during the course of this broadcast is taking a look at evidentiary tributaries and paths of investigation that run between the first World Trade Center attack, the Oklahoma City bombing, the attacks of September 11th, the anthrax attacks, as yet not only unsolved, but if you'll notice, completely ignored by the media establishment. Listeners should stop and ask themselves, when was the last time they heard anybody in the media commenting about the anthrax attacks? We're going to be looking at evidentiary tributaries running between those events and the neo-Nazi terror group The Order from the 1980s that was inspired by the Turner Diaries. And we're going to be taking a look at some interesting links between not only the white supremacist slash neo-Nazi milieu in the United States, but between some of the Islamists and Islamo-fascists who figure in the events in and around September 11th. We're going to review now an element that we looked at in For the Record 441, also in For the Record 399 and 397. William Pierce, the late William Pierce, who died of a fast-acting case of cancer in early 2002, around the early summer. William Pierce was the author of the Turner Diaries. He wrote under the nom de plume of Andrew MacDonald, reviewing very quickly the climactic event in the Turner Diaries. Quote, the I here is Earl Turner, the fictional author of the Turner Diaries. I conferred privately with Major Williams of the Washington Field Command for more than an hour on the problem of attacking the Pentagon. The military's other major command centers were either knocked out on September 8th or subsequently consolidated with the Pentagon, which the top brass apparently regard as impregnable. And it damn near is. We went over every possibility we could think of, and we came up with no really convincing plan except perhaps one. That is to make an air delivery of a bomb. In the massive ring of defenses around the Pentagon, there is a great deal of anti-aircraft firepower, but we decided that a small plane flying just above the ground might be able to get through the 3-mile gauntlet with one of our 60-kiloton warheads. One factor in favor of such an attempt is that we have never before used aircraft in such a way, and we might hope to catch the anti-aircraft crews off their guard. Although the military is guarding all civil airfields, it just happens that we have an old crop duster stashed in a barn only a few miles from here. My immediate assessment is to prepare a detailed plan for an aerial attack on the Pentagon by next Monday. We must make a final decision at the time, and then act without further delay. November 9th, 1993. It's still 3 hours until first light and all systems are go. I'll use the time to write a few pages, my last diary entry. Then it's a one-way trip to the Pentagon for me. The warhead is strapped into the front seat of the old Stearman and rigged to detonate either on impact or when I flip a switch in the back seat. Hopefully, I'll be able to manage a low-level airburst directly over the center of the Pentagon. Failing that, I'll at least try to fly as close as I can before I'm shot down. It's been more than 4 years since I've flown, but I've thoroughly familiarized myself with the Stearman cockpit and been briefed on the plane's peculiarities. I don't anticipate any piloting problems. The barn hangar here is only 8 miles from the Pentagon. We'll thoroughly warm up the engine in the barn, and when the door is opened, I'll go like a bat out of hell straight for the Pentagon at an altitude of about 50 feet. And then the Turner Diaries ends. By the way, I would note that November 9th is a date viewed as having occult significance as well as historical significance for the Nazi movement. November 9th was the date of the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923, and Die Kristallnacht in 1938. The Berlin Wall also came down on November 9th of 1989. The concluding passage of this section of the Turner Diaries: thus end Earl Turner's diaries as unpretentiously as they began. His final mission was successful, of course, as we are all reminded each year on November 9th, our traditional Day of the Martyrs. So note that the climactic episode in the Turner Diaries, authored by William Pierce, is a low-level suicide aerial attack on the Pentagon involving the use of a crop-dusting aircraft. I would note that some of the September 11th hijackers, including Zaharias Moussaoui, the alleged 20th hijacker, whom we're going to talk about in a few minutes, were looking into obtaining crop dusters. Crop dusters are not particularly sophisticated aircraft, but they can fly very, very low, and they have a very small turning radius. They can also obviously distribute biological weapons and chemical weapons as well. What we're going to do now is to review an element that we looked at in For the Record 386, and this concerns an evidentiary tributary running between the First World Trade Center bombing, the mastermind of the First World Trade Center bombing, Ramzi Youssef, and the Oklahoma City bombing as well. One of the things that we've discussed in a number of broadcasts, including For the Record 386, is the fact that one of the templates that was apparently used to craft the September 11th attacks was Operation Bojinka. That is Serbo-Croatian for Big Bang. It was a plan to hijack a bunch of airliners over the Pacific, U.S. airliners, and destroy them with all people on board being killed. That plan was masterminded by Ramzi Youssef. An article in the Manila Times from the spring of 2002 discussed a deathbed confession by a woman named Elmina Abdul, the widow of one of the co-founders of Abu Sayyaf, a fellow named Edwin Angeles. Now, Abu Sayyaf is the Philippine affiliate of Al-Qaeda. Edwin Angeles, as we've looked at in a number of broadcasts, including For the Record program number 92, was a fellow who was going to be a witness at the trial of Timothy McVeigh, but Judge Mach, who also presided over the trial of the Order, the neo-Nazi terror group who killed Alan Berg, Judge Mach would not allow Edwin Angeles to give evidence. In this article from the Manila Times, it is alleged that Edwin Angeles, in addition to being one of the co-founders of Abu Sayyaf, the Al-Qaeda affiliate in the Philippines, was also present at a meeting in which he saw Terry Nichols, nicknamed the Farmer by these Islamo-fascists, present at a meeting that discussed not only plans for Operation Bojinka, but plans to blow up a United States government building. And it appears that that was in Oklahoma. This article was authored by Dorian Zumel Sikat. It's from the Manila Times of April 2nd of 2002. The full URL at which this can be accessed will be put on the description. It's titled Deathbed Confession. Abu, that's a reference to Abu Sayyaf, the Al-Qaeda affiliate in the Philippines. Abu, part of Oklahoma blast, again by Dorian Zumel Sikat, Manila Times, April 2nd, 2002. It reads in part as follows. The woman in question here is Elmina Abdul, who was interviewed on her deathbed. She was dying of cancer, and this deathbed confession was witnessed by Basilan Provincial Information Officer Christopher Puno, last name P-U-N-O. Skipping down on the article, quote, Elmina was Edwin's fourth and last wife. She met him in 1995 while he was in the Basilan Provincial Jail. They were married in 1997, almost a year before Angeles was summarily executed in Basilan in 1998. What she told me at that final interview was at once revealing and shocking. Edwin had told Elmina the entire chronicle of his experience as a co-founder of the Abu Sayyaf group and a deep-cover agent of the Department of National Defense beginning in 1991. Edwin told her that he expected to be killed soon, and he was. Among the most interesting revelations that Angeles shared with Elmina was about a meeting between himself, Ramzi Youssef, Abdul Murad, both of whom are now serving multiple prison terms for terrorist activities, including the First World Trade Center bombing in 1993, Abdurrazak Akubakar Janjalani, unidentified members of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, and two men who Angeles identified only as Iraqis. I would say that one should consider the possibility that they were from another Middle Eastern country as well. The meeting, according to Elmina, was held in a warehouse near a Dole, Philippines plant in South Cotabato between General Santos City in Davao del Sur. There were two other men at that meeting, a man whom Angeles identified as Nichols and as codename Farmer, and another American whom he did not identify by name. It's important to note that most Filipinos commonly describe Caucasians in the country as Americans. The meeting, according to Elmina, took place in 1994. She could not remember the exact date. In that meeting, according to Elmina, Angeles told her that the major topic of the discussion was the bombing of specified targets and how to build bombs. Angeles also told Elmina that Nichols was later sent to a place that he, Angeles, didn't name for more detailed instruction on how Nichols and his other American friend could build a bomb to destroy a building in the United States. She did not specify. She could not remember which building that was to be. Elmina also told me that before he was gunned down, Edwin showed her documents that proved that he actually was a deep-cover agent for the Department of National Defense of the Philippines. He said that those documents were presented in court in his defense, and that was the reason that he was acquitted of the charges against him. That is a matter of record. But since I have never seen the documents, I will not name the high-ranking defense officials whose signatures were said to appear on those documents. And again, remember that Operation Bojinka, talked about here, was the template for the 9/11 attacks. Continuing, Angeles also told Elmina about Project Bojinko, an allegedly Iraqi-financed operation of terror that targeted several buildings in the U.S., the bombing of several U.S. airliners, bombing U.S. embassies overseas, and hitting other U.S. targets. Among the buildings in the U.S., according to Elmina, were another attack on the World Trade Center, the federal buildings in San Francisco, and in a place he called Oklahoma, parenthetically Oklahoma. Again, before we continue here, note that the designation of these Middle Eastern people as Iraqis should be taken with a grain of salt. They may actually have been Iraqi nationals. One of the things that we've looked at in connection with September 11th and related machinations is that Iraqi nationals were deliberately utilized by some al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood elements in order to deepen the enmity that already existed between the United States and Iraq, which in turn was intended to deepen the enmity between the United States and the Muslim peoples of what the Third Reich referred to as the Earth Island, the vast stretch of land going from the Straits of Gibraltar all the way across Europe, Asia, the Middle East, China, India, and the former Soviet Union, encompassing most of the world's land mass with most of the world's petroleum resources and dominated across its middle stretch by a large Muslim population. Returning to the Manila Times article, was there an international conspiracy of terror forged in a meeting in an abandoned warehouse in 1994 that included Angeles and Nichols, whom he referred to as the farmer? Did that conspiracy include members of al-Qaeda and the Iraqi government, or at least Iraqi nationals? Does the Abu Sayyaf group actually receive financial and material assistance from al-Qaeda and or Iraq in order to carry on its campaign of terror? Elmina did not give precise, clear answers to those questions. She was relating what Angeles had told her not long before he died. There is one thing clear. Edwin Angeles did meet with Nichols and another, quote, American, unquote, along with some state-sponsored international terrorists. Elmina knew that she was dying. She knew that all our efforts to help her recover would not be enough to save her. She told me what she knew to be the truth, as her husband had told it to her. At the beginning of the interview, I asked Elmina why she was willing to talk to me after such a long silence. She told me, quote, I am going to die soon. I want to tell the truth about my husband so that people will know, unquote. Now, we're going to turn to the issue of bioterrorism, and again, shortly after September 11th, there were a series of anthrax attacks on media outlets and on key Democratic senatorial leaders. Those attacks have not been solved, and indeed one almost never hears about them. In For the Record program 317 and 324, we talked about Dr. Larry Ford, who worked for the apartheid-era South African government's BW program titled Project Coast. He also worked for the CIA, and he also had links with unnamed far right-wing paramilitary terrorist groups. In For the Record 386, we took a look at an article from the New York Times titled "California Doctor's Suicide Leaves Many Troubling Mysteries Unsolved." That article was by Joe Thomas from the New York Times of November 3rd of 2002. And in that article we looked at, among other things, the fact that Larry Ford was influenced by the Turner Diaries, in turn authored by the late William Pierce, who had an ominous foreshadowing of the September 11th attacks in 1998. Skipping down on this New York Times article, after Ford's death, Detective Ray said, the authorities learned that Dr. Ford had been a consultant to Project Coast, which has been accused of creating weapons for use against the enemies of apartheid. They also discovered that he had held extreme racist views and once told a girlfriend that to understand him, she should read the Turner Diaries, the anti-Semitic and white supremacist novel popular among far-right groups that prosecutors say inspired the Oklahoma City bombing. And skipping down on the story, we also note that Larry Ford's areas of operation also involved Nevada, specifically the city of Henderson, Nevada, which was also one of the areas of operation for Aryan Nations member Dr. Larry Wayne Harris. More about that in a minute. Skipping down on the article, again, New York Times, 11/3/2002, perhaps the deepest fear in the entire affair was that Dr. Ford had been working with anthrax. That trail, too, has run cold. After Dr. Ford's suicide, the police got tips that he had buried anthrax in a gold mine. They searched fruitlessly in California. 4 months later, documents in a Nevada trash dump showed that Dr. Ford had been in touch with people involved in anti-tax and anti-government groups. Some of them had tried to use bacteria to extract gold from dirt. In December 2000, investigators searched a derelict gold milling site outside Henderson, Nevada. They found a separator funnel, a white liquid, and Dr. Ford's business card. A federal agent said they also found directions for making chemical and biological weapons, including anthrax, but that was all. The site's proprietor had recently died of unrelated causes. As we looked at in For the Record 419, and we reviewing information from FTR number 89, Henderson, Nevada was also one of the places that Larry Harris had been involved with, and he also had an anthrax stash, at first alleged to be weapons grade and then sort of ignored. He claimed he was going to be making vaccines. I would note that Larry Harris was a member of the Aryan Nations milieu, was inspired in part by the Turner Diaries, as was apparently Larry Ford, and that Larry Wayne Harris also had an associate who had a laboratory in Frankfurt, Germany, as well. So again, note that we find Turner Diaries evidentiary tributaries running through not only the situation of Larry Wayne Harris, but also through Dr. Larry Ford, and that both apparently, at least for a period of time, were operating in the Henderson, Nevada area outside of Las Vegas. It had been theorized that Las Vegas might have been one of the target areas for al-Qaeda attacks. It's viewed as the city of sin. I would also note that some of the September 11th hijackers also visited Las Vegas shortly before they immolated themselves on 9/11. What we're going to undertake next is an article that we looked at in For the Record program number 373 and that we reviewed in number 380. This concerns a motel outside Oklahoma City that was apparently used as one of the staging areas by the Oklahoma City bombers. It also was apparently visited by Mohammed Atta and some of the September 11th hijackers or would-be hijackers. One of the people alleged to have been in this area was Zaharias Moussaoui, and an associate of Zaharias Moussaoui was seen at the same motel prior to the Oklahoma City attacks in 1994 and 1995. It also appears, according to people who were at the motel, that Timothy McVeigh and company were associated with some Middle Eastern people. Again, I would take the characterization of these people as Iraqis with a grain of salt, as one, I think, should take a grain of salt with the assertions by Edwin Angeles that these were Iraqis. They may have been Iraqi nationals. And again, one of the things that has apparently emerged as a strategic gambit by planners of al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood is to use nationals from a given Middle Eastern country in order to provoke hostility between the United States and the government of those countries, and in turn exacerbating hostility between the United States and the Muslim population of the Earth Island. We're going to review an article called The Terrorist Motel by Jim Krogan. This is from the LA Weekly of July 26th and April 1st of 2002. The article begins, and again, note, first of all, links of the September 11th hijackers to this motel. Note an associate of Zaharias Moussawi's links to this motel. Note the links of the Oklahoma City bombing milieu to this motel, and contacts between people from the Oklahoma City bombing and people of Middle Eastern extraction, quote, Iraqis, unquote, perhaps Iraqi nationals. I would not necessarily assume that they were involved with the Iraqi government. By the way, Larry Harris also claimed that Iraqi nationals had entered the United States to launch biological warfare attacks. The possibility that those attacks might actually have been perpetrated by white supremacists of the Aryan nations milieu or related elements in order in turn to be blamed on, quote, Iraq, unquote, in turn designed to exacerbate conflicts between the United States and Iraq, and in turn to exacerbate conflicts between the United States and the Muslim population of the Earth Island is not one to be too readily dismissed. If so, that would place that particular gambit along the same strategic lines that perhaps may have dictated the use of Iraqi nationals in some al-Qaeda and or Muslim Brotherhood co-operations with domestic Nazi elements in the United States. Again, turning to The Terrorist Motel by Jim Krogan, LA Weekly, July 26th through August 1st of 2002, we read, "What happened at the nondescript roadside motel outside Oklahoma City was just a fleeting encounter during the twisted cross-country odyssey of the terrorists who would carry out the September 11th attacks. Mohammed Atta, alleged leader of the plot, and two companions wanted to rent a room but couldn't get the deal they wanted, so they left. It was an incident of no particular importance except for one thing. The owner of the motel remembers Atta being in the company of Zaharias Moussawi, the so-called 20th hijacker, who was arrested prior to, quote, September 11th, and now faces conspiracy charges in connection with the terrorist assaults, unquote. If this recollection is correct, the entire incident and its absence from the public record raises new questions about the FBI investigation of Moussawi and even the 1995 destruction of the federal building in Oklahoma City. Already, the FBI has endured a withering political and media critique for failing to aggressively investigate Moussawi and his contacts during his 4 weeks in custody prior to the attacks in the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Some FBI officials have responded by characterizing Moussawi as only a major player. And we're going to resume with this account on the other side of this broadcast. Remember that WFMU is archiving the For the Record programs on Real Audio. More recent programs streaming at www.wfmu.org/Dave Emory, one word, DAVEEMORY. Older programs at a longer URL available for download only on Real Audio. That URL is linked to the wfmu.org/Dave Emory website and to the Real Audio equipped For the Record section of the Spitfire website at www.spitfirelist.com. Spitfirelist is one word, SPITFIRELIST.com. There will be a detailed annotated description of For the Record Program 443 in the For the Record section of the Spitfire website within a week or so of the airing of this program. Listeners who have inquired about supporting the work of Dave Emory can find a section to click on in order to do so at the beginning of each description of each For the Record program in the For the Record section of the Spitfire website. That concludes Side 1 of For the Record program number 443, The Serpent's Diaries Part 2, subtitled Neo-Nazis and September 11th, being recorded on January 25th of 2004. My name's Dave Emory. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is Side 2 of For the Record program number 443, titled The Serpent's Diaries, Part 2, subtitled Neo-Nazis and 9/11. This program is being recorded on January 25th of the year 2004, and recall, of course, WFMU is archiving the For the Record programs on Real Audio. More recent programs streaming at www.wfmu.org/Dave Emory. Older programs for download only on a longer URL linked to both the wfmu.org/Dave Emory website and to the real audio-equipped For the Record section of the Spitfire website. Within a week or so of the airing of this program, there will be a detailed, annotated description of For the Record program number 443 in the For the Record section of the Spitfire website. Listeners have inquired about how they can help to support the work that I'm doing. At the beginning of each For the Record description, there is a page that you can click on in order to pursue that in greater detail. Now, we're going to return to the article that we were looking at the conclusion of Side 1 of this program. The general focus of this program are evidentiary tributaries running between the neo-Nazi milieu of the Aryan nations and the National Alliance, the milieu of the Turner Diaries, the First World Trade Center attack in 1993, the Oklahoma City bombing, the anthrax attacks that followed September 11th, and the September 11th attack. We're going to resume with an examination of an article that we looked at in For the Record 373 and also 380. It's called The Terrorist Motel by Jim Crogan, C-R-O-G-A-N. This is from the LA Weekly of July 26th through August 1st of 2002. This motel, the so-called terrorist motel, is a motel at which apparently members of the September 11th hijack team, also allegedly Zaharias Moussaoui, the alleged 20th hijacker, and also the Oklahoma City bombers, including Timothy McVeigh, stayed. Things of importance here are that, first of all, if this account is true, it connects Mohammed Atta and Zaharias Moussaoui in a concrete way. It also links someone who knew Moussaoui and stuck up for him, and that person, whom we will talk about in a minute, was present at this motel prior to the Oklahoma City bombing in 1994 and 1995. Also, people at the motel recall Timothy McVeigh being in the presence of Middle Eastern nationals. They were superficially identified as Iraqis. I would take that with a grain of salt, but they may have been Iraqis who had been recruited by the al-Qaeda milieu in order to specifically provoke conflict between the United States and Iraq and to exacerbate conflict between the United States and the Muslim peoples of what the Third Reich referred to as the Earth Island. Again, from The Terrorist Motel by Jim Crogan, LA Weekly, July 26th through August 1st of 2002. What happened at the nondescript roadside motel outside Oklahoma City was just a fleeting encounter during the twisted, cross-country odyssey of the terrorists who would carry out the September 11th attacks. Mohammed Atta, alleged leader of the plot, and two companions wanted to rent a room, but couldn't get the deal they wanted, so they left. It was an incident of no particular importance except for one thing. The owner of the motel remembers Atta being in the company of Zaharias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker, who was arrested prior to September 11th and now faces conspiracy charges in connection with the terror assaults. If this recollection is correct, the entire incident and its absence from the public record raises new questions about the FBI investigation of Moussaoui and even the 1995 destruction of the federal building in Oklahoma City. Already, the FBI has endured a withering political and media critique for failing to aggressively investigate Moussaoui and his contacts during his 4 weeks in custody prior to the attacks in the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Some FBI officials have responded by characterizing Moussaoui as only a minor player. But the report from the motel owner, if proven, could change that. And it also could force the FBI to reopen its investigation of Middle Eastern connections to the 1995 Oklahoma City blast because convicted bombers Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols reportedly stayed at the same motel, interacting with a group of, quote, Iraqis or other Middle Eastern nationals during the weeks before the bombing. Skipping down. But that circus, that's the Zaharias Moussaoui circus, obscures a conundrum of a different sort. The government's case, outlined in its new 6-count conspiracy indictment, is largely circumstantial, lacking any definitive link between Moussaoui and the 19 hijackers identified by federal authorities. All of which makes the apparent shelving of the Moussaoui-Atta sighting all the stranger. In fact, even though multiple sources contend that the FBI interviewed the motel owner, there's no indication that prosecutors were told. It's possible that the FBI found the motel owner's identifications wrong or his story unreliable, but it's still odd that in interviews with the Weekly, Justice Department prosecutors seem to know nothing about the motel encounter, especially because agents reportedly told the motel owner they would pass the information on to Moussawi's defense. The motel co-owner, who spoke on condition of anonymity, said the incident occurred around August 1, 2001, just 6 weeks before September 11th. They came in around 10 or 11 a.m. and started talking to my desk clerk, he said. Even though he was working about 10 feet away from the trio, the owner didn't really pay any attention at first. They were asking my clerk, who no longer works here, about a weekly rate for our rooms. The former clerk could not be reached for comment. The motel, explained the owner, sets aside some rooms with small kitchenettes to rent on a weekly basis, but they were all taken. He said the clerk explained the situation, but the visitors were persistent. Finally, my clerk asked me to talk to them. The motel owner said that Moussawi and a man who appeared to be Marwan al-Shahi, who helped crash a jetliner into the South Tower of the World Trade Center, were friendly and said a few things, but Atta was clearly the leader. He did most of the talking and seemed very serious, said the owner, adding, quote, I was standing face to face about 2 feet away from Atta and talked to the three of them for about 10 minutes. Atta asked if he could rent one of the other rooms at a weekly rate, and I told him no. I asked him what they were doing here in the area, and Atta told me they were going to flight school. I thought he meant Federal Aviation Administration training in Oklahoma City, but Atta told me no, they were taking flight training in Norman. I said I didn't understand why they wanted to rent one of my rooms, since we were about 28 miles from Norman, and there are a lot of reasonably priced motels a lot closer. But he said they had heard good things about my place and wanted to stay there. I told them I was sorry, but we couldn't accommodate them, and Atta finally said, okay. Then they all thanked me for my time and left. After the attack, said the motel owner, he recognized his visitor in photos from television reports. I was really stunned, he said. Then he decided to call the FBI hotline. The motel owner said he didn't hear right back from the FBI. In the interim, he also spoke to a former law enforcement officer who was investigating reported sights of Mujahid Abdul Qadir Meneptah, M-E-N-E-P-T-A, at the same motel during the mid-1990s. Meneptah, reportedly a friend of Moussawi's, was arrested 30 years ago in Colorado for aggravated robbery and served more than 3 years in prison. After September 11th, Meneptah publicly defended Moussawi, calling him a scapegoat, unquote. The FBI arrested him as a material witness and subsequently charged Meneptah with a federal gun violation. He pleaded guilty and in April of 2002 was sentenced to 15 months in federal prison. He was never charged with any terrorism-related crime, but during the preliminary hearing on the gun charge, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms agent Jeffrey Whitney testified that a confidential source placed Meneptah at a meeting of a radical Islamic group in St. Louis, where he allegedly threatened to shoot any police officer who entered the mosque. Meneptah's attorney challenged the credibility of this report in court. A former desk clerk at the motel, a different clerk from the one who purportedly dealt with Atta and Moussawi, told the Weekly that he remembered Meneptah because in 1994 and 1995, prior to the Oklahoma City attack, Meneptah frequently visited the motel office. There he bought coffee and talked for hours to this clerk. The clerk and his wife, who both formerly worked at the motel, said they picked Meneptah's picture out of a photo lineup prepared by a law enforcement officer who had interviewed the motel owner. This officer, who also spoke to the Weekly on condition of anonymity, said that after the motel owner told him about the Moussawi sighting, he contacted a member of Oklahoma's Joint Terrorism Task Force, which includes the FBI. The FBI finally acted on the tip. The motel owner said that on December 19, 2001, he went to FBI offices in Oklahoma City for a formal interview, where he was debriefed by an FBI agent and by Oklahoma City Police Sergeant Jerry Flowers. Quote, "We talked for several hours, and I told them everything I knew." The motel owner said he would have taken a polygraph exam, but was not asked to do so. The Weekly's law enforcement source corroborates the December 19th interview. The motel owner never heard from the prosecutors in Moussawi's case, but got one more call from the FBI several weeks later. The agent told me they had passed on a copy of my statement to Moussawi's defense team, and I might be getting a call from them, but I was under no obligation to talk to them. However, I don't know if that was the truth. Since then, I've never heard from anyone connected to Moussawi's case." Unquote. One reason for the FBI's apparent lack of interest might be this motel's alleged connection to Timothy McVeigh and a group of Iraqis, or parenthetically other Middle Eastern nationals, who worked in Oklahoma City. According to the motel owner and other witnesses and investigators interviewed by the Weekly, McVeigh and several of these, quote, Iraqis, unquote, were motel guests in the months preceding the 1995 bombing. Witnesses also claimed they saw several of the, quote, Iraqis, unquote, moving barrels of material around on the bed of a truck. The motel owner said the material smelled of diesel fuel, and he had to clean up a spill. Diesel fuel was a key component of the truck bomb that blew up the federal building, unquote. The motel owner said he and his staff reported this information to the FBI in 1995. "We did have an ATF agent come out and collect the originals of the room registrations for that period, but we never heard back from them. And I never could get the registrations returned." He added that his previous experience with the FBI made him reluctant to contact them about Moussawi. Quote, "But I decided it was my duty to tell them what had happened, so I did," unquote. Former Oklahoma City TV reporter Jana Davis also interviewed motel staff and former guests. In the process, she collected signed affidavits about their contacts with McVeigh and the, quote, Iraqis, unquote. She tried twice to give the Bureau this information, but the FBI refused to accept her materials. The Weekly first reported on her investigation in an article published in September of 2001. The Weekly's law enforcement source said he has reviewed Davis's material and considers it credible. Quote, "Last December, I personally took the documents to the Joint Terrorism Task Force," he said. Again quoting, "I told them they should do their own investigation." The response was not encouraging. He said he was later informed that the Bureau brought in an analyst, quote, "but I was told it would probably go nowhere. They were afraid the whole Oklahoma City bombing can of worms would be opened up, and the FBI would have to explain why they didn't investigate this material before." The Weekly contacted numerous local and federal investigators and agencies, including the Oklahoma Task Force, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI, and the Justice Department. All declined to comment. Prosecutors on the Moussawi case also declined official comment, but their reaction suggested they knew nothing of the motel encounter. After being told about the motel owner's interview and allegations, Assistant U.S. Attorney Robert Spencer responded with a one-word question about the sighting. When? Spencer then declined further comment. Another Moussawi prosecutor, David Novak, also declined comment, but Novak wanted to know the name of the motel owner. Other substantial connections already tie the Sooner State to Moussawi and separately several 9/11 hijackers. According to the Moussawi indictment, on September 29, 2000, Moussawi made email contact with Airman Flight School in Norman. Then on February 23, 2001, he flew from London to Chicago and then to Oklahoma City. What he did in the next few days is unknown, or at least not accounted for in the indictment. But on February 26th, Moussawi opened a bank account in Norman depositing $32,000. From February 26th to May 29th, he attended flight school in Norman. Then, he suddenly quit the school. Between July 29th and August 4th, Moussawi made calls from public payphones in Norman to Germany. On August 1st and 3rd, Ramzi bin al-Shib wired Moussawi a total of about $14,000 from 2 train stops in Germany to somewhere in Oklahoma. This wire transfer does imply a connection to terrorist plotters because al-Shib, an alleged al-Qaeda member, wired money to other hijackers as well. On August 3rd, Moussawi purchased 2 knives in Oklahoma City. And on August 10th or 11th, an acquaintance drove Moussawi from Oklahoma to Minnesota for enrollment in a new flight school. Authorities arrested Moussawi in Minnesota on August 17th on an immigration violation. As has been widely reported, Moussawi attracted attention because he said he was interested in flying a plane, but not learning how to take off or land. He was in federal custody when the 9/11 attacks occurred. As for the terrorists who took part in 9/11, Atta and Marwan el-Shehi visited the Airman Flight School in Norman in July of 2000, according to the Moussaoui indictment. The motel owner identifies al-Shehi as the third person with Atta and Moussaoui when they allegedly inquired about a room. And on April 1st, 2001, Nawaf al-Hazmi, who helped hijack American Airlines Flight 77, which crashed into the Pentagon, was stopped for speeding in Oklahoma and given 2 tickets. The Oklahoma State Trooper found no outstanding warrants and turned al-Nazmi loose. The media has since reported that the CIA had been tracking al-Hazmi, but never told the Immigration Service or the FBI that he was a suspected terrorist during his 21-month stay. Authorities have never publicly accounted for Atta and al-Shehi's whereabouts during the time of the alleged motel encounter. The Moussaoui indictment lays out a tantalizing possible association between Atta and Moussaoui, but never puts the two in the same place at the same time. The link could exist, however, along a dusty Oklahoma roadside off Interstate 40 at a small motel that is indistinguishable from hundreds of others, except for its possible connection to terrorists. And that is very interesting indeed, and the evidentiary tributary running in the direction of the Oklahoma City bombing, also inspired by the Turner Diaries, is also very interesting. Recall that one of the aspects of the Oklahoma City bombing that has been effectively obscured is that, according to an ATF informer who passed a lie detector test, Carol Howe, Timothy McVeigh was acting on orders from Andreas Strassmeyer, a former German Army intelligence officer, and the son of Andreas Strassmeyer, Helmut Kohl's chief of staff and the architect of German reunification, which, by the way, took place the Berlin Wall came down on November 9th of 1989, one of the dates viewed as propitious by the Nazis. And recall that the grandfather of Andreas Strassmeyer and the father of Gunther was one of the charter members, one of the early members of the German Nazi Party in Germany. Also, I would recall that Timothy McVeigh was executed rather summarily in the spring of 2001. One wonders if perhaps people wanted to close his mouth. I would note that John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, obviously someone who is now known as an extreme right-winger, as we saw in For the Record 271, had interceded on behalf of a Dr. Sell, a Missouri dentist who had strong connections to paramilitary right-wing groups and had been plotting to murder a federal agent, which is a very interesting thing for an attorney general to be acting on behalf of. So again, I think some interesting questions need to be asked about John Ashcroft. In the late summer of 2003, there was a major power blackout that blacked out parts of Canada and also New York City and much of the American Northeast. Interestingly enough, a terrorist group that also took credit for bombings in Turkey and has alleged to be connected to Al-Qaeda took credit for those attacks. I don't know if, in fact, that is the case. I will add that material to the printed description, but we're not going to be able to cover it here due to lack of time. But I'm going to read an episode from the Turner Diaries, which I think has some very interesting implications for this country's future. It's about a plan to not only sabotage a nuclear power plant, but thereby to spread radiation and panic, and also to do tremendous economic damage to the United States by causing massive power failures in the industrial Midwest. From Chapter 16 of the Turner Diaries, we read, April 10th, 1993. This is the first time in a week I've had some time to myself and have been able to relax. I'm in a Chicago motel with nothing to do until tomorrow morning when I'll take a tour of the the Evanston Power Project. I flew out here Friday afternoon for 2 things, the Evanston tour and a delivery of hot money to one of our Chicago units. Skipping down. Of course, we have 2 other money presses running on the West Coast, and we'll be setting up others in the near future. And if I can figure a way to take out the Evanston project, that'll be a capital loss of nearly $10 billion in one stroke, not to mention the economic damage which will result from the loss of electrical power to industrial plants throughout the Great Lakes region. Skipping down again, we want to hit the new nuclear power complex at Evanston during the next 6 weeks while they're still guiding tourists through it. After the 1st of June, it will be closed to the public permanently. Knocking it out will become much more difficult. The Evanston Power Project is an enormous thing. 4 huge nuclear reactors surrounded by the biggest turbines and generators in the world. And the whole thing sits on concrete pilings a mile out in Lake Michigan, which supplies the cooling water for the reactor's heat exchangers. The project generates 18,000 megawatts of electrical power, almost 20 billion watts. Incredible. The power is fed into the power grid, which supplies the entire Great Lakes region. Before the Evanston project went into operation 2 months ago, the whole Midwest was suffering from a severe power shortage, much worse than we have here, which is bad enough. In some areas, factories were restricted to operating only 2 days a week, and there were so many unexpected blackouts in addition that the region was on the verge of a real economic crisis. If we can take out the new power plant, things will be even worse than they were before. In order to keep the lights on in Chicago and Milwaukee, the authorities will have to steal power from as far away as Detroit and Minneapolis, where there's none to spare. All of that part of the country will be hit hard, and it took 10 years to design and build the Evanston project, so they won't be able to remedy the situation very soon. But the government has thought about the consequences of losing the Evanston project, too, and the security there is pretty formidable. One can't get near the place except by boat or airplane, and there are searchlights, patrol boats, and strings of buoys with nets of cable between them all around it, which make the approach by water almost out of the question. Skipping down again, it seems to me that about the only way we could mount an attack on the place by conventional means would be to sneak some heavy mortars within range, somewhere near the shore where there is a possibility for concealment. But to my knowledge, we don't have that kind of weaponry available at the moment. Anyway, the really vital parts of the power station are in such massive buildings that I doubt a mortar attack could inflict more than superficial damage. They then come to a decision to contaminate the nuclear power plant with radioactive material, thereby creating panic. Skipping down again, in essence, my idea is this. Since there's no way a single tourist can sneak in enough explosive material to wreck the place, nor any way he can position the small amount he could sneak in so it would be really effective, like punching a hole in one of the reactor pressure vessels, we may as well forget about explosives. Instead, we'll try to contaminate the plant with radioactive material so that it can't be used. What makes this idea feasible is that we have a source inside the organization for certain radioactive materials. We can easily pack enough of a really hot and nasty radionucleotide, something with a half-life of a year or so, into a cane or a crutch, together with a small explosive charge for dispersing it to make the entire Evanston power project uninhabitable. Skipping down. The whole plan is pretty scary, but it has one big advantage. The anti-nuclear lobby will have a field day with it. It will catch people's imagination to a far greater extent than any ordinary bombing or mortar attack. It will horrify many people, and it will knock many more of them off the fence. I must confess that I'm glad at this point that my probationary period still has 11 months to run, and that I won't be asked to volunteer for this particular mission. And it talks about the panic that will create, and that the anti-nuclear lobby will be used to help generate public panic in this regard. Consider the possibilities for the future. The Washington Post, Sunday, December 7th of 2003, article by Joby Warwick. Dirty bomb rockets vanish. It's dateline Tiraspol in Moldova. In the ethnic conflicts that surround the collapse of the Soviet Union, fighters in several countries seized upon an unlikely new weapon, a small, thin rocket known as the Alazan. Originally built for weather experiments, the Alazan was transformed into a terror weapon, packed with explosives and lobbed into cities. Military records show that at least 38 Alazan warheads were modified to carry radioactive material, effectively creating the world's first surface-to-surface dirty bomb. The warheads are not known to have been used, but now, according to experts and officials, they have disappeared. It'd be interesting to see whether Islamo-fascists or perhaps some of their apparent white supremacist colleagues in the United States eventually get a hold of them. Yet another portent, perhaps, of things to come. This is from the L.A. Times of January 7th of 2004. Article by Scott Gold, dateline Houston. Its headline, Domestic Terrorism Fight Comes Under Fire. It reads in part, One evening 2 winters ago, a man in Staten Island, New York, absent-mindedly flipped through his mail. Inside one envelope was a stack of fake documents, including United Nations and Defense Department identification cards and a note, "We would hate to have this fall into the wrong hands." It had. The package, intended for a member of a self-styled militia in New Jersey, had been delivered to the wrong address. From that lucky break, federal officials believe they may have uncovered one of the most audacious domestic terrorism plots since the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people. Starting with a single piece of mail, investigators discovered an enormous cache of weapons in Noonday in East Texas, including the makings of a sophisticated sodium cyanide bomb capable of killing thousands of people. And the 3 people arrested, William Crar, his common-law wife Judith Bruey, B-R-U-E-Y, and Edward S. Feltus, appear to have had white supremacist connections and, links to some of the sort of anti-Semitic and Nazi types that were inspired by the Turner Diaries. It may appear to people to be odd to have white supremacist or neo-Nazi elements in this country hooked up with people from the Middle East, but there are a number of historical tributaries, including the concept of the Earth Island envisioned by German geopoliticians, the Muslim Brotherhood, an Islamic fascist organization, and also recall the structural economic connections between the Bush milieu and the Middle Eastern oil-producing nations, and also the historical relationships between the Bush milieu and the Third Reich. We're going to conclude with a passage from the book Militant Islam Reaches America by Daniel Pipes, and in turn here, Daniel Pipes is accessing documents from the Hamas Charter. Listen to this, and if the possibility of Islamists and neo-Nazis hooking up sounds strange, just listen to this point of commonality from an ideological standpoint. The Hamas Charter sees Jews as the ultimate enemy. They have, quote, used their wealth to gain control of the world media, news agencies, the press, broadcasting stations, etc. They were behind the French Revolution and the Communist Revolution. They instigated World War I. They caused World War II. It was they who gave the instructions to establish the United Nations and the Security Council to replace the League of Nations in order to rule the world through them, unquote. So, again, it's not such a far stretch. WFMU archiving the For the Record shows, more recent programs streaming on Real Audio at wfmu.org/Dave Emory. Older programs available for download only on a longer URL, linked to both that website and to the For the Record section of the Spitfire website at www.spitfirelist.com. There will be a detailed, annotated, article-length description of For the Record Program 443 in the For the Record section of the Spitfire website within a week or so of the airing of this program. Listeners who have inquired about how to support the work that I'm doing will find a page on which they can click at the beginning of each description of the For the Record programs. That concludes Side 2 of For the Record Program number 443, The Serpent's Diaries, Part 2, subtitled Neo-Nazis and 9/11, being recorded on January 25th of 2004. My name's Dave Emory. Thanks for listening.